Hello, I'm Jimmy Miller and welcome to Inspired by Nature. This is a video for those who want to learn a new way of thinking, a way of thinking that's more sustainable because it draws on forms and processes and systems in nature that have been around for billions of years and have been solving some of the biggest problems and challenges on this planet. So today I want to talk about three things. First, I want to just share some stories about biomimicry, about what it is and what it means to be inspired by nature, to take inspiration from nature, and to create innovations that are inspired by nature. Then I want to talk about the growth and the evolution of biomimicry and biomimicry designs, and where the whole field is going to go, and where it's already going. And finally, I want to talk about how you can get involved in this field. It's a common question I get when I do a presentation or workshops on biomimicry is, where do I do this next? Or how do I get involved if there aren't opportunities in my area? So without further ado, let's just get into it. If you've never heard of biomimicry, by definition, it's innovation that's inspired by nature. The most classic example is Velcro, which was inspired by those burrs that stick to your pants. In the 1940s, a Swiss engineer was hiking through the mountains and finally got fed up with the burrs sticking to his dog. And he took it under a microscope to see that those hooking mechanisms called barbules were really a clever attachment strategy. And so George de Maistral, the engineer, copied this hooking strategy and made Velcro, which is one of the most successful adhesives of our time. Another cool example is a company called Whale Power, which I worked with in Toronto. And what they did is they copied humpback whale fins. So if you look at a humpback whale, they have these interesting bumps on the front edge, which are called tubercles. And they're inspired by that and started to explore how that could be applied to something like a wind turbine blade. And when they applied these bumps, they found that the wind turbine blade with these tubercle technologies were 20% more efficient, and they ran at slower wind speeds and were quieter than traditional blades. What I love about this example is that it showcases this idea that nature does design. And it helps us realize that nature's been designing for billions of years, so there aren't a lot of inefficiencies or strategies that are unnecessary. Nature's going to do things that work. If it doesn't, it goes extinct or it gets rid of it. It's pretty straightforward. And that's kind of where the lens can shift. So fundamentally, to me, biomimicry is a shift in our perspective. It's about recognizing that we are natural, and yet we design so differently from the rest of the natural world. So those examples that I just shared are examples of nature's form. And there's a lot of really cool examples out there. So you may have heard of the bullet train in Japan. And the stories with the bullet train is that the original design looked more like a bullet nose. And what they found is that when that train was going through tunnels, it was creating a buildup of pressure. And when it exited the tunnels, that buildup of pressure would make a huge explosion, like a sonic boom. And so they couldn't really have that in residential areas. And they're trying to figure out a strategy to solve that. And they had a birder on their team, which luckily enough understood the kingfisher. And the kingfisher has this beautiful beak that if you see it enter the water, the beak enters and penetrates the water so perfectly that it doesn't ripple around the entry point. And he thought, what if we use that? Because the real design problem was it's two pressure mediums. So when you're in the tunnel, you have that pressure buildup, and then when you exit, you have that expansion. And they were thinking about the density of air and how penetrating these two different densities could be done more effectively. And the kingfisher gave a form-based solution, just copy the shape of the beak of the kingfisher. And what's amazing is that when they did this, they found that it did reduce that noise, that sonic boom, but it also increased the efficiency of the bullet train. So it was much faster, using much less energy. You may remember Speedo. I can't remember which Olympics, but early in the 2000s, they made a sharkskin based swimsuit. So they copied the little rippling pattern on sharkskin, which you can see at a microscopic scale. When they applied this to the swimsuits, they were breaking massive records. So it's actually been banished and discontinued, that swimsuit. But it was cool to see that by emulating nature's forms, by emulating shark skin, we can actually increase efficiency. So now new companies in automobile automotive and airplane industries, they're looking to this Sharkskin technology to improve efficiencies of transportation. What's also cool about Sharkskin is a company called Sharklet Technologies found that Sharkskin not only is faster, it's also antibacterial. So what they've done is they've created a film based on that same shape, that same ribbing pattern that you see on a shark skin. And they've made a film that they can apply to high traffic areas or areas where you need to be very careful with the germs. And they've made a film that is antibacterial, that doesn't use chemicals for cleaning. So it actually is kind of a self-cleaning, or just it doesn't allow bacteria to adhere to it. So these are examples of nature's forms and copying nature's forms and how they can improve human designs and solve some of the problems that we're struggling with. But like I said, there's a deeper level of biomimicry where you can also copy nature's processes and nature's systems. So what I mean by processes is just think about the way that we do design and the way that nature does design. We use a lot of energy. We've built our systems on this paradigm of resisting and separating ourselves from nature. And so that takes a lot of energy. We build robust buildings, robust infrastructure. We try to plan for those 50, 100-year floods, and we build dikes and dams to try and control and resist that natural flow. That takes a lot of energy to resist nature. I mean, just think of your lawn and how much energy you put into keeping dandelions from taking over. We love manicured systems, and we use energy to create them. But in nature, this complex systems that is being created is all done with very different strategies. So think of spider silk, for example. Spider silk has a strength to weight ratio stronger than any material we've ever made. But what's amazing is that it's creating that material. That spider is creating that material at body temperature and body pressure. It doesn't use high temperature and pressure and a lot of energy. It does it with a subset of the periodic table of elements. It's using only the energy of the sun. You think of a forest, and that is the engine of that system. And what's also amazing is that it's fully recyclable, which gets into this third phase of biomimicry. So copying form is the sexy, visible kind of emulation of nature. Copying nature's processes is a little bit deeper and starting to explore how we can become more sustainable. But how we become more resilient and a better community is copying nature's systems. So as it relates to the spider silk is fully recyclable. And if you think about it, there are no such thing as waste in nature. Everything in nature is reused and broken down into its basic constituents, its basic parts. And those parts are then regathered and reorganized into something new, a new species, a new organism. What's also amazing in nature is that everything's working. There's no unemployment, there's no IP, there's no patents, everything is freely shared. And what we're realizing at a systems level is that nature's much more cooperative than we ever really knew. Things like mycelium, and the more we learn about forests and complex ecosystems, is we're learning that trees are actually sharing resources and information through their root systems. So there's a lot of great research happening in BC, understanding how a mother tree will actually donate resources to its progeny, to its kids, to help support it, but not only help support it, but actually dictate how much sun it gets. So it's creating this resilient species or this resilient organism by kind of controlling the levels that it gets. It wants it to be competitive. So nature is definitely competitive, but it's a lot more cooperative than we think. We've also found that these mother trees, these trees that have been quite successful at capturing energy and materials and resources, they'll share and donate to even competing species in the forest. So you can recognize that there's this inherent understanding that a forest is much more resilient, or better off at least, when there's more diversity or when there are more species succeeding. And if you think about it, it kind of conflicts our capitalist kind of mentality of unlimited growth, in that you don't see a forest that has one tree 600 feet above the rest. There's a strategy in nature that if a canopy is intact, if you look at that umbrella, if it's intact, it's a lot harder for the environmental pressures to come in and disrupt the system. So wind and major weather conditions. Like a major rainstorm is actually dissipated because of that canopy. So that heavy rain dropping will actually splatter and splash through the leaves and down the bark and into the trunks, so that when it gets to the ground, it's not hammering the ground and actually sealing it up like we see in a lot of farming. In agriculture, I know my uncle tells me it's always the worst to have a heavy rainstorm after you plant the seeds, because it actually will seal the top layer. And in a clay condition, that seal is really hard to penetrate if you're if you're a sprout, like a corn sprout or a bean sprout. So in nature, they have these canopies, these strategies for dissipating the environmental pressures, and it makes the system more resilient. And that's the cool stuff. That's what I'm really interested in, is how we can adopt some of these principles and ideas from nature at a system level to reimagine our own built environments, our own systems. So in a nutshell, that's biomimicry. But once you open the door to this conversation, it's kind of a rabbit hole. And the more you learn about the incredible things in nature, the more you realize that nature's doing all of these incredible designs and creating incredible processes for how to thrive on this planet. You really realize that it's an unforgivable journey, and it's never ending. And that's really why I call my company Biomimicry Frontiers, because I think it's the next frontier of design and design thinking. So, form, process, and system. That's the basic kind of foundation for biomimicry. Where is it going though? This is the exciting part, because what's happening now is the technology is catching up to the crazy ideas that we can abstract from nature. So when I taught biomimicry, one of the first projects we did was explore the contrast of an engineered wall and a wall in nature. So an engineered wall is robust, it's strong, it's static. You don't think about it. That's a good wall. It resists its environmental conditions. It separates the outside from the inside. But if you think about a wall in nature, you've got a little bit of a different paradigm. Like a wall in nature could be your skin. And if you think of your skin's expanding and shedding, it's growing hair, it's contracting, it's doing all sorts of really small, interesting kind of mechanisms for in response to its environment or in response to its need. So a crazy idea could be, what if a wall could breathe like skin? What if it could breathe to react to its environmental conditions? And a crazy idea like that now isn't so crazy, because we have technologies that can actually support these ideas. So we've got 4D and 3D printing. We've got new material ecology. If you don't know Neri Oxman, check out her work and the stuff she's doing with materials and using ecology to inspire new material designs. We've got green chemistry. We've got computational architecture. We've got additive manufacturing. We've got all these tools now that will make crazy ideas like walls that can breathe autonomously really plausible. Like, this stuff can happen. It's really only limited by your creativity, and that is my belief. Whenever I teach or do workshops on biomimicry, my drive is to get people to be as creative as possible, because I believe that when you have those ideas that are truly sustainable and truly inspired by nature, it's not limited by technology anymore. We can find those people who are programmers, or who are 3D printers or manufacturers, or who are garage builders, who can make this stuff happen. I mean, my uncle, for example, he's a farmer, but he can make anything, it seems. And he doesn't have a university education. He doesn't have that traditional, book smarts. But man, he could out-engineer me any day. That's the exciting thing. And why it's so important now is because we're really talking about some of these huge challenges that we are faced with, like climate change. These problems that we're faced with today, as Einstein says, can't be solved with the same thinking that caused them. So a paradigm shift is required, and a paradigm shift requires creativity. And I think the greatest creative model is nature. It shows you a pathway to a sustainable system, and that's amazing. So with these big problems, we need new thinking. And what we're also finding is that there's major shifts happening in our economy. I know a lot of people struggle and say, well, how do you apply these designs to a built environment that's so rigid, and we've inherited this specific way of doing things, and it's safe, and you don't want to disrupt that safety. And I completely understand that, completely. But in nature, innovation happens at very small scales, even starting at the genetic level. And that's my metaphor, is we have to start by changing our thinking, because once we change our thoughts and our paradigms, we'll manifest ideas from that place. And those ideas will be so different than what we've known. And it will take time to shift the system, because humans don't like change. But I think we have problems now that are driving the rate that we need to change. And we also have technologies that can make it happen. So a cool example is Uber. The way that Uber disrupted a system so rapidly, they disrupted, specifically the taxi industry. And they found a wasted opportunity, created a small technology, and the system absorbed it, and they made a disruption to the system. There's no reason we can't do that in many other areas in our built environment. The only thing I really challenge you is to use nature as your model and measure, because you know you're leveraging a sustainable idea, and you do it consciously. Because we're not here to disrupt and cause pain and disrupt the whole equilibrium that we've created, but we do recognize we have to shift the way that we do things. And in that, in some of the research, Dell suggested that 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 do not exist today. And I've used that stat in some of my lectures because it makes me realize that a system is shifting. It's going to shift, and there's going to be a lot more innovation and entrepreneurs coming up with ideas to create their own jobs. And it also means that those industries that exist today are either going to be a part of that disruption or be disrupted. So innovation and creativity is a must. LinkedIn just did a study, and they said it's the most desired trait of people looking for jobs is creativity, because we need to be creative at this time. In order to manage and go with the flow of that disruption, you have to be resilient, you have to be resourceful, and you have to be creative in how you use those resources. And I think biomimicry as a methodology gives you a way of being creative. I see biomimicry more as a practical philosophy, but there are tools for how you can abstract ideas from nature and how you can use nature to be creative. And in future podcasts, we'll talk about that. But right now, I just want to talk about the field and how it's growing. Finally, the third thing I wanted to talk about is how you can get involved. I get this question a lot, like I said, because people are inspired by this idea, and there's like an inherent knowledge of, yes, of course nature does design, and yes, of course it could be a great model, but there aren't many places to do it. And first and foremost, the place that I started, and I think everyone should start, is with Biomimicry 3.8, which is an organization in the United States that was founded by Janine Benyus and Dana Baumeister, who are friends of mine, and really the epicenter and the foundation for the growth of this movement. So I'll say biomimicry is not new. We've been copying nature and design for hundreds of years. Think of Da Vinci. You can think of Inuit people in the way that they made snowshoes based on Arctic hare feet. It's not a new idea, but Janine Benyus wrote a book in 1997 called Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature, and she coined that term and laid the foundation for the methodology. And then from that, she partnered with Dana to create this company that provides education services. It provides consulting. It provides a platform for entrepreneurs to develop biomimicry-based technologies. And they're the ones who taught me to really dig into this philosophy in a course in Costa Rica, which was pretty amazing. But that's where you start. They have an online introduction course. They have a master's course that you can take. They have a Be Professional program, a biomimicry professionals program where you can become a professional in the field. And you can do that from anywhere. They have workshops around the world. They've also inspired local biomimicry platforms. So kind of subgroups of Biomimicry 3.8. And in those subgroups, each one is unique to its own area. So it's They might be doing more education based. It might just be a meetup for people interested in the field to converse and collaborate. They might offer workshops. That's another place to go. Now, if you're not near any of these and not really interested in participating in 3.8 stuff, I would just challenge you to start shifting your lens of design and doing your own personal research. This has been my journey for the last 15 years. I've just become obsessed with how we can apply nature to design and how we can explore some of these incredible design secrets from nature. So books like The Hidden Life of Trees, or Jay Harmon's A Shark's Paintbrush, or Dr. Tasmin, her book on called Teaming, which is about the social aspects of nature and how it can apply to organizational behavior. There are resources out there that you can use to start to shift your lens of design. And if you want to create from that lens, then it's your opportunity to apply this new paradigm to whatever you're interested in. If you're an artist, a designer, an economist, start to explore how things in nature would solve problems in your world. And so what I do is I apply it to the built environment. We designed a house in India and used different strategies, from elephants to baobab trees to ant and termite mounds. We used a whole bunch of different strategies, and we'll talk more about that in the future as well. But today I want to talk about how you can get involved. The final thing I'll say is that I used to teach biomimicry at OCAD University in Toronto, Canada, and since that's been stopped, there's been a huge kind of void, not only in my heart, but I think in Canada, for a place to do biomimicry. So that was the inspiration of Biomimicry Frontiers, is one, to apply biomimicry so that we can showcase more examples of biomimicry, but two, to give people an area or a platform to create their own business, create their own ideas that are inspired by nature. So to start with, we have local workshops. So if you're in the area, I've also done workshops in Sri Lanka, in the States, in Canada, for any age. But what I'm building right now and what will be launched in the spring of this year is an online do-it-yourself course. It'll be a 6-video course. And this first launch will be for founding members. So I want those people who are willing to give good feedback. I'll give a discounted rate, but I expect that we work closely together to make sure that this course is as effective as possible for the users. And what this course provides is essentially everything that I've learned in the last 15 years of teaching and applying biomimicry. I want to give as much of my tools away so that you can create a concept. So very briefly, the first module is about changing your mindset and how you can actually shift your context so you can access deeper creativity in nature. It's a really fun, kind of different way of looking at design, recognizing that we've inherited a way of doing things and a way of believing, and that in order to really be creative, we might have to step out of that inherited way of doing things. The second module is the basic methodology. How can you actually abstract ideas from nature? And how do you get into conversation with nature? And in this module, you really don't have to be a biologist. I actually recommend you don't look at biological research too deeply, because it will distract you from your own creativity and your own ability to analyze something. And then the third module is about giving you the tools to come up with a concept, come up with an idea that solves a problem that you're passionate about. So we help you find what your passion is. We also help you find what the world's looking for and connecting those two things. And then from there, help you come up with a product, an idea, a concept, something you could prototype and potentially take to market. The whole goal for me in this entire course is to make more biomimicry technologies. So that starts with working with people to become a biomimetics, to become biomimicry thinkers. And that's why I say you need to think naturally before you build naturally. And once we do that, then we'll start to see these small scale shifts in the system. We'll start to see these applications where people will recognize that Velcro was inspired by nature and that nature is design. And then from there, I think we can shift a system to a more sustainable, harmonious way of doing things. So that's it. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's great to practice this. It's great to have you on board. And as we move forward, I'm going to continue to share stories from the field, stories from nature, and continue to give as much as I can from everything that I've learned and am learning about this field, so that we make more people inspired by nature. All right, take care.
Me.